The morning sun cast 3 long shadows across the dusty surface of Vesta 7. 2 belonged to the planet's binary stars, while the third came from the smaller red dwarf that lazily orbited the system. Under this unique light, Dr. James Walker wiped the sweat from his forehead, his environmental suit's cooling system struggling against the triple-starred heat. Anything interesting in grid section E7? The voice of his research assistant crackled through his helmet's communications system. Walker looked down at the device in his hand, a standard-issue surveyor's tool that had served him well across 12 different archaeological expeditions. Nothing yet, Tom. Just more of those crystalline formations we saw yesterday. Walker moved carefully through the ruins, his boots leaving clear imprints in the reddish dust that covered everything. The ancient city stretched out before him, its spiral architecture unlike anything humans had encountered before. He wasn't supposed to be here alone. The expedition rules clearly stated that researchers should work in pairs, but Tom had stayed back at the base camp to repair some equipment. Walker had promised to just do a quick preliminary scan, but something about this section of the ruins kept drawing him deeper. The surveyor's tool beeped softly, its metal surface reflecting the triple sunlight. Walker adjusted its settings, and the holographic display showed unusual energy readings coming from beneath a partially collapsed structure. "Hold on," he muttered, more to himself than to Tom. "I might have something here." As he approached the structure, movement caught his eye. A group of local Vestani had gathered at a safe distance, their tall, blue-skinned forms easily visible against the rust-colored landscape. The indigenous people usually ignored the human researchers, but today they seemed different. They were watching him intently, their large, silver eyes fixed on his every move. Walker activated his tool's cutting beam, carefully clearing away centuries of debris. The metal rod hummed in his hands, projecting a precise laser that sliced through the accumulated dust and rock. As he worked, he noticed more Vestani gathering. Their normally stoic features showed unusual animation, and they were pointing at his tool. "Tom, are you seeing this?" Walker adjusted his helmet camera. "The locals are acting strange." "Coming through now," Tom replied. "That's unusual. I've never seen them so interested in our work before." The debris finally cleared away to reveal a small chamber. Walker's lights illuminated ancient markings on the walls, and in the center stood a pedestal. The markings looked familiar somehow, but not quite like the other Vestani writings they'd documented. As he raised his surveyor's tool to take measurements, a collective gasp came from the watching Vestani. Several of them dropped to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the ground. Others began making complex gestures in the air, their long fingers tracing patterns Walker had never seen before. "Tom, something's happening here. The Vestani are. I think they're praying." Before Tom could respond, an elderly Vestani approached Walker. Unlike the others, who wore simple cloth wrappings, this one was adorned in elaborate crystals that caught and split the triple sunlight. The elder pointed at Walker's surveyor's tool, then at the markings on the wall. Walker looked closer at the ancient writings. There, carved into the stone, was an unmistakable image, a figure holding what appeared to be an exact replica of his surveyor's tool. "Tom." Walker's voice was barely a whisper now. "I think we might have just stumbled onto something big." "Really big?" The elder Vestani spoke, the translator in Walker's suit processing the complex harmonic language. "The bearer has come," it rendered in English. "The sacred staff returns to us, as the ancestors foretold." More Vestani were arriving now, drawn by some unseen signal. Their musical language filled the air with a chorus of tones that Walker's translator couldn't keep up with. But their body language was clear enough. They were treating his simple surveyor's tool like some kind of holy relic. Walker stood frozen, his mind racing. In all his years of archaeological work, he'd never faced anything like this. He'd come looking for artifacts, but instead, he'd somehow become part of their religion. "Tom," he said quietly, "get the diplomatic team on the line. I think we're going to need them." The diplomatic team arrived within hours, their shuttle kicking up clouds of red dust as it landed near the ruins. Walker hadn't moved from his spot, partly because he wasn't sure if he was allowed to, and partly because the crowd of Vestani had grown so large that movement was impossible. "Quite a situation you've got here, Doctor," said Director Mary Roberts as she stepped out of the shuttle. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her expression suggested she'd dealt with similar cultural mishaps before, though perhaps not quite this dramatic. The elderly Vestani leader, who Walker now knew was called Stone Voice, approached the director with unusual grace for his height. The translator struggled to keep up with his harmonic speech. "The prophecy speaks of this day. The bearer of the sacred staff will unite our people and bring wisdom from beyond the stars." Director Roberts looked at Walker's surveyor's tool, then at the ancient carvings, then back at Walker. "Have you tried explaining what it actually is?" "3 times, Walker sighed. "The translator can't seem to find the right words. Every time I try to explain surveying equipment, it comes out as wisdom measuring tool of the ancestors or something similar." The crowd of Vestani had begun a low melodic chant. Their triple shadows danced on the ruins as they swayed, creating an almost hypnotic effect. More concerning were the gifts they'd started bringing. Crystals of impossible colors, ancient texts, and what appeared to be religious artifacts of tremendous value. "We can't accept these," Walker whispered to the director. "Some of these items must be priceless. Refusing them could cause a diplomatic incident," Roberts replied quietly. "For now, we document everything and play along while we figure this out." A young Vestani pushed through the crowd, moving with more urgency than was typical for their usually deliberate species. This one wore simple robes marked with mathematical symbols. The translator identified him as Bright Mind, a scholar from their central learning temple. "Honored bearer," Bright Mind's translated voice came through clearer than most, suggesting he'd studied human language patterns. "The ancient texts speak of your coming. The sacred staff's measurements will guide us to enlightenment, just as they guided our ancestors." Walker activated his surveyor's tool, intending to demonstrate its mundane function. The holographic display lit up, showing detailed scans of the surrounding ruins. The crowd gasped in collective awe. Stone Voice raised his arms to the triple suns. "See," the elder's voice rang out. "The staff reveals the hidden truth of stone and air, just as the prophecy foretold." Director Roberts pulled Walker aside, while the Vestani fell into deeper chanting. "Dr. Walker, I've been reviewing the first contact records from when we discovered Vesta 7. There's something odd. The initial survey team that found this planet 200 years ago, they lost some equipment." Walker's eyes widened. "You don't think?" "A standard-issue surveyor's tool, older model but similar design. The team reported it missing after mapping these very ruins. They searched but never found it." The pieces started falling into place in Walker's mind. An ancient human survey tool, discovered by the Vestani centuries ago, its simple measuring functions seeming like magic to a pre-technological society. Generations of worship and study, building an entire religion around its capabilities, waiting for more wisdom from the stars. "We have to tell them," Walker said, watching as more Vestani arrived, some traveling from distant settlements on foot. "We will," Roberts assured him, "but carefully and over time. Right now, you're holding what they consider proof of their most sacred beliefs. One wrong move could destabilize their entire society." Stone Voice approached again, this time carrying an ornate crystal box. "Bearer, we have prepared the sacred chamber for you and your staff. The ceremony of measurement must begin at the setting of the third sun." Walker looked helplessly at Roberts, who gave him a small nod. "Remember," she whispered, "everything we do here will set a precedent for future human-Vestani relations. Sometimes the hardest part of first contact is figuring out how to explain that we're not as extraordinary as they think we are." The 3 sons of Vesta 7 continued their slow dance across the sky, as Walker realized his simple archaeological expedition had just become something far more complicated. Word spread across Vesta 7 faster than anyone at the Earth Embassy had expected. The Vestani might not have advanced technology, but they had perfected a system of crystal resonance communication that carried news across their world within days. By the end of the week, the ruins had become the center of the largest gathering in recorded Vestani history. Walker stood at his designated spot in the newly named chamber of the staff, watching as thousands of blue-skinned pilgrims filed past him each day. His simple surveyor's tool, now carefully held in a crystal mounting designed by Stone Voice himself, drew gasps of wonder from each new group. "The numbers are still growing," Tom reported during their daily briefing. "We've counted transport vehicles from every major Vestani settlement. Some are traveling for weeks just to get here." Director Roberts rubbed her temples. "And the trading ships from the outer colonies. 7 more arrived this morning. They're carrying whole families who sold everything they owned just to make the journey." Walker felt the weight of guilt growing heavier with each passing day. The Vestani treated every measurement he took as a sacred act. When he'd scanned a damaged wall to check its stability, 3 different religious sects had started debating the spiritual significance of the structural weakness. Brightmind had become a regular presence, recording everything Walker did with remarkable accuracy. The young scholar's questions were becoming increasingly technical, showing an understanding that went beyond religious awe. "Bearer," Brightmind asked during a quiet moment, "the sacred staff speaks in numbers, does it not? Numbers that describe the physical world." "Yes," Walker answered carefully, following the diplomatic team's advice to be truthful without revealing too much. "It measures and records data about physical objects, like our ancestors' crystals," Brightmind said, holding up one of their communication devices. "They also speak in patterns and numbers." Before Walker could respond, a commotion arose from the main entrance. A new group had arrived. But these Vestani were different. They wore red crystal ornaments instead of the traditional blue, marking them as members of the rarely seen northern tribes. Stone Voice hurried forward, his usual calm demeanor showing cracks of concern. The northern tribes had remained separate from the main Vestani society for generations, following their own interpretation of the ancient texts. The leader of the northern group stepped forward. Unlike the other Vestani, who moved with flowing grace, this one's movements were sharp and decisive. The translator provided his title, Truth Seeker. "We have come to verify the bearer," Truth Seeker announced, his harmonic tones carrying an edge that made the translator crackle. "Our texts speak of tests that the true bearer must pass." Director Roberts appeared at Walker's side, her diplomatic training evident in her calm voice. "We welcome all who come in peace to observe the staff." "Observe." Truth Seeker's silver eyes narrowed. "The sacred staff is not meant for mere observation. It must be used as the ancestors intended, to reveal the grand pattern." Walker felt a chill despite his environmental suit's temperature control. Every time he used the surveyor's tool for its actual purpose, the Vestani found deeper religious meaning in the results. What would happen when they realized it was just a sophisticated measuring device? But Truth Seeker wasn't finished. "Our ancestors spoke of a time when the staff would sing with the crystals, joining their voices in harmony. If this is truly the sacred staff of prophecy, let us see it done." The crowd fell silent. Even the constant background hum of Vestani communication crystals seemed to dim. Stone Voice looked at Walker with an expression that somehow managed to convey both hope and fear. Walker glanced at his surveyor's tool, remembering something from its technical specifications. The device used crystalline resonance to take certain types of measurements, the same basic principle the Vestani used for communication. Was it possible? "Director," he whispered, "I have an idea, but it's either going to solve everything or make it much, much worse." The 3 sons of Vesta 7 were reaching their daily alignment, casting a bright purple light through the chamber's crystal windows. Whatever Walker was going to do, he needed to decide quickly. The future of human-Vestani relations might depend on what happened in the next few moments. Walker's idea had worked better than anyone expected, And that was becoming a problem. By connecting his surveyor's tool to a Vestani communication crystal, he had created a harmonic resonance that not only satisfied Truth Seeker's challenge, but produced detailed three-dimensional maps of the entire ruins. The northern tribes declared it a miracle. Stone Voice's followers saw it as proof of their prophecies, and the Earth Diplomatic Corps saw it as a political nightmare. The Vestani High Council wants to make you their supreme leader, Director Roberts announced during an emergency meeting. The command center screen showed crowds still growing around the ruins. They're calling it the unity of the staff. Walker slumped in his chair. I'm an archaeologist, not a religious figure, definitely not a political leader. It gets more complicated, Tom added, bringing up new data on the main screen. Remember those energy readings we detected when you first found the chamber? They're spreading. The entire ruin complex is waking up. The room fell silent. Ancient alien technology coming back to life was usually exciting news for archaeologists. But with millions of Vestani gathered around the ruins, treating every little discovery as a religious experience, it was terrifying. Truth Seeker and Stone Voice had put aside their differences and now jointly led the daily ceremonies. But other factions were emerging. Some Vestani wanted to use this sacred staff to unlock the ruins' secrets immediately. Others insisted on careful, ritualized study. A few fringe groups even claimed that Walker was an imposter and the true bearer was yet to come. Bearer. Brightmind's voice came from the doorway. The young scholar had earned enough trust to enter the human facilities, though some Vestani saw this as controversial. The crystals are singing new songs. The ancient patterns are changing. Walker checked his tablet. The energy readings were growing stronger, forming distinct patterns throughout the ruins. Whatever the original survey team had activated 200 years ago, his modern surveyor's tool was completing the process. Show me, he said, following Brightmind to the main chamber. The crowds parted before them. Their movements now synchronized in a way that made Walker nervous. The Vestani were becoming more organized, more unified, and it was happening faster than anyone had predicted. Director Roberts caught up with them at the chamber entrance. The Earth Council is concerned, she whispered. They're talking about invoking the non-interference protocol. That would mean evacuation. Walker replied, watching as Brightmind connected more crystals to his surveyor's tool. Abandoning the Vestani in the middle of their greatest cultural shift in centuries. Better than risking a religious war if they learned the truth. Roberts nodded toward the gathering crowd. Or worse, if whatever's awakening in these ruins turns out to be dangerous. The chamber's crystal walls pulsed with new energy. Walker's surveyor's tool was no longer just measuring the ruins. It was interacting with them. Holographic displays filled the air, showing symbols that mixed Vestani script with something far older. Truth Seeker approached, his red crystals resonating with the chamber's energy. The grand pattern reveals itself. Bearer, will you lead us into the new age? Behind him, Stone Voice added, the prophecies speak of choices. The bearer must decide the path. Walker looked at his surveyor's tool, then at Director Roberts. The Earth Diplomatic Corps had strict rules about interfering with developing civilizations, but they also had rules about taking responsibility for human actions, and that lost survey team from 2 centuries ago had already changed Vestani society forever. The chamber's crystals hummed louder, their resonance spreading through the ruins. Whatever choice Walker made would affect not just the Vestani's faith, but their entire civilization's development. And somewhere in these awakening ruins lay the truth about why that first survey team's equipment had been left behind. Director, he said, making his decision, I need to show you something about these energy patterns. I think I know why that first team never came back for their tools. The 3 suns cast overlapping shadows through the crystal walls, creating patterns that seemed to match the holographic displays. Time was running out to choose a path forward. The holographic displays from Walker's surveyor's tool filled the chamber with a soft blue light, showing what he had discovered. Director Roberts stared at the images, her diplomatic training barely hiding her shock. The ruins weren't just a city. They were a research station, built by the ancient Vestani to study something that had fallen from the stars. 200 years ago, Walker explained, pointing to the reconstructed data. The first survey team didn't just lose their equipment. They activated this facility without knowing it. Brightmind moved closer to the displays, his silver eyes reflecting the holographic light. These are the same patterns found in our oldest temples. Our ancestors were scientists. The chamber's crystals pulsed in rhythm with the surveyor's tool, revealing more hidden data with each scan. The ancient Vestani had built this facility to study a crashed human probe, one of thousands launched during Earth's early space exploration. But instead of seeing it as alien technology, they had treated it as a gift from the stars. "Look at these readings," Tom said, examining his tablet. The original survey team's lost equipment became part of the facility's network. It's been gathering data for 2 centuries, waiting for compatible technology to connect with. Walker watched as Truth Seeker and Stone Voice studied the revelations with their people. The Vestani's reactions weren't what he had feared. Instead of anger or denial, they showed intense curiosity. Generations of treating scientific tools as sacred objects had prepared them for this moment in an unexpected way. "Our ancestors learned from the stars," Stone Voice said, his harmonic voice carrying through the chamber. "They built all this to understand the wisdom that fell from above. And now the bearer shows us what they discovered." "The sacred staff was never just one tool," Truth Seeker added, his earlier suspicion replaced with understanding. "It was the wisdom of measurement itself, the ability to understand the physical world through numbers and patterns." Director Roberts stepped forward. "Dr. Walker's survey tool is modern human technology, similar to what your ancestors found. We never intended to deceive you. The original team's equipment was lost by accident." The chamber fell silent as the Vestani processed this information. Walker held his breath, wondering if everything they'd built would collapse. But then Brightmind spoke up, his voice clear and strong. "Don't you see?" The young scholar addressed his people. "Our ancestors were wise enough to recognize important tools of learning, even if they didn't understand their origin. They preserved this knowledge, protected it, waited for the day when we would be ready to understand it fully." The crystal's resonance changed, becoming more complex. The ruins' hidden systems were fully awake now, sharing centuries of collected data. Star charts, weather patterns, geological surveys. The ancient Vestani had recorded everything, combining human measuring tools with their own crystal technology. They built this chamber, Walker realized, not just to study human technology, but to prepare for our return. They knew someday humans would come back, bringing new versions of the tools they had found. Truth Seeker raised his red crystals, which now pulsed in harmony with the chamber's blue ones. The prophecies weren't about worship. They were instructions, teaching us to preserve knowledge until we could understand it. More displays activated, showing how the ancient Vestani had reverse-engineered parts of the human probe's technology, combining it with their crystal science. They hadn't regressed into blind worship. They had chosen to develop their technology differently, focusing on harmony and communication rather than mechanical advancement. Director, Walker said, watching the Vestani explore their rediscovered heritage, "I don't think we need to worry about the non-interference protocol. The interference happened 2 centuries ago. What we're seeing now is first contact done right, just delayed by 200 years." The 3 sons of Vesta 7 reached their daily alignment, and for the first time, Walker understood why the ancient Vestani had built their research station here. The combined light created perfect conditions for their crystal technology, just as his surveyor's tool had provided the final key to unlock their ancestors' message. Now the real work would begin, helping the Vestani understand their true heritage, while learning from their unique path of technological development. The days following the revelation brought chaos to Vesta 7. Not everyone accepted the truth with the same grace as Stone Voice and Truth Seeker. Across the planet, temples closed their doors. Some priests threw away their crystals. Others insisted the human explanation was a test of faith. Walker found bright minds sitting alone in the newly understood research station, surrounded by active holographic displays. The young scholar hadn't slept in days, trying to translate the ancient data into modern Vestani language. "The southern temples have shut down," Bright Mind said without looking up. "They say if the sacred staff is just technology, then nothing has meaning anymore." Walker sat beside him, watching the displays show centuries of careful observations. "Your ancestors found meaning in these measurements. They saw beauty in understanding the physical world. But they built a religion around it." Bright Mind's voice carried an edge of frustration. "They turned science into ceremony. Why?" Director Roberts entered the chamber, followed by Stone Voice. The elder Vestani looked tired but determined. "We may have an answer to that," she said. "Show them what you found." Stone Voice held up an ancient crystal, its surface etched with complex patterns. When activated, it projected the image of a Vestani from centuries ago. The recording was damaged, but the message was clear enough. "To those who find this," the ancient figure spoke, "we chose our path carefully. The wisdom from the stars showed us two roads: rapid technological advancement or deeper understanding. We chose understanding." Walker leaned forward, fascinated. The ancient Vestani had made a conscious choice about how to use the human technology they'd discovered. The recording continued. "Others would have copied these tools, built weapons, reached for the stars too quickly. We saw a better way. By treating these instruments with reverence, we ensured each generation would learn their principles fully before moving forward. The ceremonies taught patience. The rituals preserved knowledge. Look at these dates." Tom's voice came through Walker's communicator. "Their development wasn't slow. It was deliberate. They spent centuries mastering each principle they learned from the probe before moving to the next." Truth Seeker arrived with a group of northern scholars. They carried records showing how each religious ceremony actually taught scientific principles. The ritual of crystal alignment, basic geometry, the sacred harmonies, wave physics. Every act of worship had been a lesson in disguise. "But what do we do now?" Bright Mind asked, looking around at his gathered people. "How do we move forward?" An alert sounded from Walker's surveyor's tool. The ruined systems had finished processing 200 years of data, combining ancient Vestani observations with modern human measurements. The results were stunning. "Your ancestors' approach worked," Walker said, showing them the analysis. "You understood wave mechanics before building engines, mastered crystal harmonics before attempting radio, developed organic computing instead of electronics. You didn't fall behind. You took a different path." The ceremonies weren't about worshiping technology, Stone Voice realized. They were about respecting knowledge itself, about learning completely before moving forward. Director Roberts nodded. "Earth rushed into space, learned many lessons the hard way. Your ancestors chose a slower but perhaps wiser path." The chamber's crystals pulsed with new energy as more Vestani arrived, drawn by the spreading news. The crisis of faith was becoming something else, a renaissance of understanding. Priests who had maintained the ceremonies for generations now stood beside scholars, sharing their knowledge of the hidden principles. "Perhaps," Truth Seeker said, his red crystals glowing softly, "we don't need to choose between faith and science. Our ancestors had faith in the importance of learning and the value of understanding. That faith guided us here." Walker looked at his surveyor's tool, the object that had started everything. It wasn't sacred, but what it represented, humanity's drive to measure, understand, and explore, had inspired an entire civilization to develop in its own unique way. As the three suns began their evening alignment, the chamber filled with both traditional chants and scientific discussions. The Vestani were finding their new path, one that honored both their heritage and their future. One full cycle of Vesta 7's three suns had passed since the revelations at the ancient research station. Walker stood on the observatory platform, watching the newly constructed Crystal Science Academy take shape below. Where priests once led ceremonies, teachers now explained the principles behind them. But something unique had been preserved, a reverence for knowledge that Earth's rushed development had often forgotten. The first combined class graduates today, Brightmind said, approaching with a stack of crystal tablets. The young scholar had become the Academy's lead instructor, bridging ancient wisdom with modern understanding. They still begin each session with the traditional harmonics. Some traditions are worth keeping, Walker replied, checking his surveyor's tool one last time. The device that had started everything would be returned to Earth tomorrow, its mission complete. But its impact would last for generations. Director Roberts joined them, accompanied by Stone Voice and Truth Seeker. The once rival leaders now worked together, helping their people navigate the transition. The Earth Council has approved the new exchange program, Roberts announced. Vestani crystal technology has applications we never imagined. And we have much to learn from Earth's path as well, Truth Seeker added. Our ancestors chose to develop slowly, but now we can move forward together, learning from each other's successes and mistakes. The graduation ceremony combined old and new in ways that showed how far the Vestani had come. Traditional crystal harmonics merged with holographic displays, showing the principles they represented. Each student carried both ancient ceremonial crystals and modern measurement tools, understanding both the science and the philosophy behind them. Bearer, Stone Voice said, using Walker's old title with a new understanding, your accidental arrival completed what our ancestors began. But perhaps it wasn't an accident at all. Walker looked at him curiously. What do you mean? The Elder Vestani activated a crystal, showing astronomical calculations. The lost human probe, the first survey team's equipment, your arrival with the modern tool, all happened during rare alignments of our three suns. Our ancestors built this facility here for a reason. They knew the conditions needed to be perfect for understanding to bloom. Brightmind students demonstrated their projects, each one combining Vestani crystal science with Earth technology in new ways. One group had developed more efficient environmental suits using crystal cooling. Another had improved space communications using harmonic principles the Vestani had spent centuries perfecting. We thought finding alien artifacts would teach us about new technology, Walker said, watching the demonstrations. Instead, we learned about different ways of developing it. The Vestani didn't need faster ships or better weapons. They needed to understand the principles behind them completely. Director Roberts smiled as a student presentation showed how Vestani crystal networks could improve Earth's data systems. Both our species reached for the stars, she said. We just took different paths to get there. The ceremony reached its peak as the three suns aligned overhead. The crystal observatory amplified their combined light, creating a spectrum of colors that the graduates used to power their final demonstration. A new type of scanner that combined Earth's digital precision with Vestani crystal harmonics. The sacred staff was never about the tool itself, Truth Seeker observed. It was about teaching us to value understanding above advancement, wisdom above speed. As the day ended, Walker packed his surveyor's tool carefully in its case. Around him, the Vestani continued their work, no longer bound by blind faith or limited by superstition. They had found something better, a balance between reverence for knowledge and the drive to expand it. Will you return? Brightmind asked as Walker prepared to leave. Often, Walker promised. Earth has as much to learn from your path as you have from ours. Sometimes the longest road leads to the best destination. The three suns set in sequence, painting the sky in colors Earth never saw. On Vesta 7, an ancient message had finally been delivered, a lost connection restored, and a unique path to the stars discovered. The sacred staff had never been sacred, but the quest for understanding that it inspired truly was.